She didn't fade into history, she vanished from it. Cleopatra's death is one of the most retold stories of the ancient world. The serpent, the bite, the queen dying on her own terms. But here's what almost nobody tells you. Her body was never found. Not her tomb, not her remains, not a single object confirmed as hers. The most powerful woman of the ancient world disappeared completely, and for 2,000 years, no one has been able to explain where she went. Until 2025. Most people learn Cleopatra's story the wrong way. They start at the beginning. A pharaoh, a dynasty, a queen who played Rome against itself and lost. But that version skips the part that actually matters. It skips the moment the story stops being history and becomes something stranger. A mystery that archaeology has not been able to solve, not in a century of looking. So let's start at the end, because the end is where the mystery begins. Cleopatra VII Philopator was the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt. The Ptolemies were not native Egyptians, they were Greek. Successors of Alexander the Great, rulers who spoke Greek at court and adopted Egyptian religion and Egyptian titles as a matter of political survival. They ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, from 305 BC to 30 BC. And during that entire span, not one of them made a meaningful effort to actually integrate with the people they governed. They stayed Greek. They built in the Greek style. They addressed the Egyptian population through interpreters. Cleopatra was exceptional among them, strikingly so. According to the ancient biographer Plutarch, she was the first of her dynasty to actually learn the Egyptian language, along with several others: Ethiopic, Hebrew, Aramaic, Parthian, and more. That was not a hobby, it was strategy. She understood that the loyalty of Egypt's population, its farmers, its priests, its merchants, required a ruler who could address them directly, without the insulating distance of a translator. She wanted to rule without intermediaries, and she invested years acquiring that ability. She was born around 69 BC and came to power in her late teens, initially co-ruling with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, under the terms of their father's will. That arrangement collapsed almost immediately into civil war. Ptolemy's advisors moved against her, and she was forced out of Alexandria. She was gathering an army along the Egyptian border when Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria in 48 BC, pursuing his defeated rival, Pompey. What happened next is one of the most famous political maneuvers in ancient history. Cleopatra arranged to be smuggled past Ptolemy's guards and brought to Caesar in person, allegedly wrapped in a linen cloth or a carpet, depending on which ancient source you trust. She got the meeting, and the meeting changed everything. Caesar sided with her. Ptolemy XIII died in the Nile during the ensuing military conflict. Cleopatra was restored to the throne, and the child she bore Caesar, Caesarion, Little Caesar, gave her rule a religious legitimacy the Ptolemies had never managed before. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BC, the Roman world fractured. Cleopatra waited. She aligned herself with Mark Antony, the general who had inherited control of Rome's eastern territories. Together they built something that looked, from the outside, like an independent Mediterranean empire. Territorial grants, children, a divine public identity that cast Antony as Dionysus and Cleopatra as Isis. Augustus, then still called Octavian, Caesar's adoptive heir, did not accept this. He declared war, but he did it carefully. Roman law made it legally and politically awkward to make war on a Roman general. So Octavian declared war not on Antony formally, but on Cleopatra, a foreign queen, an enemy of Rome. It was a precise political calculation designed to make the conflict look like a defense of the Roman world against a dangerous Eastern monarch, rather than a civil war between two Romans. The decisive engagement came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC off the northwestern coast of Greece. The sea battle ended badly. Cleopatra's fleet broke first and withdrew, and Antony followed. Within a year, Octavian's forces were at the gates of Alexandria. It was over. Antony died first. Ancient sources tell us he received a false report that Cleopatra was already dead. She may or may not have deliberately spread it and inflicted a mortal wound on himself. He died in her arms, by some accounts. Within days, she was dead too. She was 39 years old. And here the story gets genuinely strange. Octavian entered Alexandria as a conqueror and met with Cleopatra in person. Multiple ancient sources describe these meetings. The details differ, but the broad shape is consistent. She tried to negotiate. She understood how to make herself useful to powerful men. She tried to do it again. It didn't work. Octavian apparently intended to parade her through Rome as the centerpiece of his triumph, living proof that Egypt had been conquered. The humiliation of that prospect, ancient sources suggest, was something she refused to accept. A queen who had presented herself publicly as the goddess Isis, who had ruled one of the wealthiest kingdoms in the Mediterranean world, marched in chains through the streets of Rome as a war trophy. That was not a death she was willing to accept. She died on August 12, 30 BC in Alexandria. Ancient accounts, primarily Plutarch, writing roughly 150 years after the events based on earlier sources he had access to, described the cause of death as the bite of an asp, a snake. The image has dominated the story ever since. The serpent, sacred in Egypt, brought to her hidden in a basket of figs. A death on her own terms. Clean, almost mythological. The kind of ending a ruler would choose. But Plutarch himself acknowledges uncertainty. He notes that no one actually witnessed her death. Her servants died alongside her, or were incapacitated, and the room was sealed before anyone could document what happened. There are ancient sources that suggest poison administered through a hairpin or a hollow comb rather than a snake. Modern scholars have pointed out that an asp bite does not produce the swift, apparently painless death that the ancient sources describe. Asp venom causes severe systemic effects that take hours and are deeply painful. Some toxicologists have proposed that Cleopatra used a combination of substances to achieve the rapid, relatively peaceful death the accounts describe. Others have argued the snake story is simply what Octavian wanted people to believe, a clean, mythological death that closed the chapter, rather than a state execution that might inspire vengeance. The truth is, we do not know exactly how Cleopatra died. We have ancient sources. We have disagreements between them. We have modern forensic analysis that creates more questions than it resolves. And what happened to her body after her death? That is where the mystery becomes something else entirely. Octavian reportedly allowed Cleopatra to be buried alongside Mark Antony. That detail comes from Plutarch. It implies a real structure, a tomb of some kind, in Alexandria or its vicinity, containing the remains of both rulers. But here is the problem that has occupied archaeologists for more than a century. That tomb has never been found. Not by Roman successors who ruled Egypt for the next 400 years and had every administrative reason to know where it was. Not by the Arab scholars and geographers who documented Egypt with extraordinary thoroughness in the medieval period. Not by Napoleon's scientific expedition to Egypt in the late 18th century, which cataloged ancient sites with systematic rigor unprecedented in that era. Not by a century and a half of modern archaeology that has excavated, scanned, drilled, ground-penetrating radared, and satellite-imaged virtually every known ancient site on Egyptian soil. The tomb of Cleopatra is simply absent from the archaeological record. Either it has not yet been found, or it no longer exists in recognizable form, or it is somewhere that has not yet been seriously investigated. Those are the only three options, and none of them is comfortable. The city of ancient Alexandria presents a particular and severe complication for anyone trying to locate anything from the Ptolemaic period. Alexandria was one of the greatest cities of the classical world, the intellectual capital of the Mediterranean, home to the library that housed the largest collection of knowledge in the ancient world. A city of perhaps 500,000 people at its peak, center of commerce and philosophy and science. But it was also built on a coastal landscape that has been geologically unstable for 2,000 years. The coastline of ancient Alexandria has subsided significantly. Archaeologists and geographers estimate that much of the ancient city's shoreline now lies 1 to 8 meters below sea level. Earthquakes and tsunamis, events documented in multiple ancient sources, altered the relationship between land and sea repeatedly. What was solid ground in 30 BC may be underwater now. What was monumental architecture, temples, palaces, royal tombs, may be rubble under the streets of a modern Egyptian city of more than 5 million people. Alexandria is not Pompeii, sealed under volcanic ash and waiting for excavators. It is a living, inhabited, continually rebuilt city, layered directly on top of its ancient self. Archaeological work in central Alexandria requires disrupting modern infrastructure, streets, buildings, utilities, and is therefore limited in scope and politically complicated. The sites that archaeologists most want to excavate are precisely the sites where modern Alexandria sits most densely. This is not a minor obstacle. It means the tomb of Cleopatra, if it survived intact, could be under a road, under a building, under the harbor of modern Alexandria, or under the sea. All 4 of those options are genuinely possible, and none of them is easily investigated. For most of the 19th and 20th centuries, the search focused on Alexandria itself, specifically on the ancient royal quarter, the Brucheion, which classical sources describe as containing the palaces and tombs of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Excavations in Alexandria have turned up important things. A sphinx bearing the cartouche of Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XII Auletes, was found in the harbor. Statuary and architectural fragments of Ptolemaic-era royal scale have been recovered. The French archaeologist Jean-Yves Empereur has mapped extensive remains of ancient Alexandria's shoreline under the water of the eastern harbor. But the tomb? Nothing. No chamber, no sarcophagus, no inscription identifying Cleopatra or Antony. The royal quarter exists in fragments and hints, but not in the concentrated architectural evidence you would expect for a major dynastic tomb complex. The search began shifting, gradually, unevenly, toward a site 45 kilometers west of Alexandria, along the Mediterranean coast. The site is called Taposiris Magna. The name translates roughly as Great Tomb of Osiris. That is not a coincidence in the way that it would be for most place names. In ancient Egypt, the relationship between a site's name and its religious function was often explicit and intentional. Taposiris Magna was an ancient temple complex dedicated to Osiris, the Egyptian god of death and resurrection, and to Isis, his divine consort, the goddess most closely identified with Cleopatra herself. Cleopatra's political and religious identity was built around Isis. She was not simply paying tribute to Isis. She presented herself publicly and in official contexts as Isis incarnate. The temples that mattered most to her, the places she invested with religious and political significance, were the temples of Isis and Osiris. A burial site aligned with that identity would be a temple of Isis and Osiris. Taposiris Magna is exactly that. The temple complex at Taposiris Magna was substantial and regionally important. Ancient sources mention it. It commanded a coastal position. And beginning in the 1990s and early 2000s, the site started producing material that got the attention of archaeologists who work on the Ptolemaic period. Coins bearing Cleopatra's image were found at the site. Mummies, not royal mummies, but mummies of a social rank consistent with high-status noblemen who might have served in a royal court, were found in the necropolis around the temple. A bust, possibly depicting Cleopatra, was recovered in the area. A collection of headless royal statues, consistent in style with Ptolemaic period royal sculpture, was excavated within the temple precinct. None of that is proof, but it represents a significant concentration of Cleopatra-adjacent material at a site with the right religious profile. The archaeologist who has driven the Taposiris Magna investigation since 2005 is Kathleen Martínez, a Dominican national who was originally a lawyer and became an archaeologist specifically because of her conviction that Cleopatra's tomb was at this site. That is an unusual career trajectory and an unusual basis for a 20-year excavation project. It is worth noting that her conviction was not idle speculation. She developed a detailed hypothesis grounded in the religious, political, and geographic logic of the late Ptolemaic period and presented it with enough rigor to secure Egyptian government permission to excavate. Over 20 years, Martinez's team has found more. Foundation deposits consistent with royal construction. A network of tunnels beneath the main temple structure, tunnels that have been partially mapped but not fully explored, whose endpoints have not been determined. The tunnel network alone is significant. Large-scale subterranean architecture in an Egyptian temple complex of this period is typically associated with either ritual or burial purposes, and the scale at Taposiris Magna goes well beyond what would be needed for typical religious infrastructure. There is also a geographic fact about Taposiris Magna that was long underappreciated, partly because it is not visible from the surface. Ancient sources and early satellite imagery both suggested the possibility of an ancient harbor at the site, a harbor that would have made Taposiris Magna not just a remote temple, but a functioning coastal node in the Mediterranean maritime network of the 1st century BC. A harbor at this scale, attached to a major temple complex with royal associations, changes the profile of the site completely. It means this was not a backwater. It was a place that mattered, a place connected to Alexandria by sea, reachable from Rome, significant enough to maintain maritime infrastructure. The harbor, if it existed, was underwater. And that is where the story of 2025 begins. Robert Ballard is the oceanographer and explorer who located the wreck of the Titanic in September 1985 at a depth of approximately 3,800 meters in the North Atlantic. He had been searching for it systematically for years before that discovery, using methods he had developed during classified work for the United States Navy, tracking deep-sea debris fields to locate specific wrecks with a precision that had not previously been possible. After the Titanic, he went on to find the Bismarck, the German battleship sunk in 1941, the PT-109, the American torpedo boat commanded by John F. Kennedy during World War II, ancient cargo vessels in the Black Sea, some of them extraordinarily well-preserved in the low-oxygen deep water, carrying amphoras still intact after 2,000 years. He is, by any serious measure, the most accomplished ocean explorer of the modern era, and he has spent decades applying deep-sea search methodology to historical questions. In 2025, Ballard brought that methodology to the coast of Egypt. His team collaborated directly with Kathleen Martínez and the Taposiris Magna excavation project to conduct what was, effectively, the first systematic underwater survey of the ancient harbor area adjacent to the temple complex. The survey used high-resolution sonar to map the shallow seafloor off the site in detail that had not previously existed, and deployed remotely operated vehicles, the same class of equipment used in deep-sea wreck investigations, to visually document what the sonar mapping revealed. What they found was not nothing. The survey revealed structural remains on the seafloor off Taposiris Magna. Stone columns, not loose boulders or natural formations, but shaped, finished columns of the type used in monumental construction. Multiple anchors of the type associated with ancient Mediterranean maritime trade, stone and lead composite anchors of a design that places them firmly in the pre-Roman or early Roman period. Fragments of amphoras, the large ceramic containers used for transporting wine, oil, and grain across the ancient Mediterranean, consistent with a harbor that handled significant cargo volumes. And critically, sections of what appeared to be worked stone floor, smooth, polished, deliberately constructed surface in an area that had been submerged for centuries. This is not the same as finding a tomb. Ballard and Martínez have both been careful and explicit about this. The survey found evidence of a harbor, a real, substantial, constructed harbor, not a natural anchorage. The columns indicate monumental architecture associated with the harbor structure. The anchors confirm maritime activity at meaningful scale. The amphora fragments confirm cargo handling over an extended period. The polished stone floor indicates a level of construction investment associated with significant structures. Not a rough working dock, but a harbor complex built to a standard consistent with royal or state sponsorship. This harbor existed, it was not small, and it was directly attached to the site where Kathleen Martínez has been accumulating Cleopatra-associated archaeological evidence for 2 decades. National Geographic listed this discovery among the 6 most important archaeological findings of the year 2025. That designation is worth pausing on. National Geographic has covered archaeological work continuously for more than a century. Their annual lists of significant finds are not produced by a single editor with a preference. They reflect the assessment of the archaeological community about what has genuinely expanded the record. The Taposiris Magna Harbor Survey made that list not because it is a dramatic single-object discovery, a crown, a sarcophagus, a named inscription, but because it documented physical structures that had not previously been recorded, and because it fundamentally changes the evidentiary landscape of the most important unsolved location problem in classical archaeology. What the discovery changes is the probability calculation. Before 2025, Taposiris Magna was the leading hypothesis among archaeologists who work actively on Cleopatra's burial site. That status was built on the accumulated material from Martínez's excavations over 20 years. The coins, the statuary, the noble burials, the tunnels. After 2025, the site also has a documented ancient harbor, a major piece of geographic and logistical evidence that had been inferred but not confirmed. The harbor confirms that Taposiris Magna was not a peripheral location in the ancient world. It was connected, it mattered, and its harbor infrastructure was built at a scale consistent with royal or state-level investment. Does that prove Cleopatra's tomb is here? No, it does not. Columns and anchors on the seafloor adjacent to a temple complex do not prove that a specific person was buried nearby. The ancient Mediterranean had hundreds of harbor sites, many of them attached to significant temple complexes. The presence of a harbor at Taposiris Magna eliminates one objection to the site, the argument that a remote, relatively inaccessible location would not have been chosen for a major royal burial. But it does not by itself confirm the burial. What it does is deepen the case. It adds a specific, documented physical element to the profile of the site that makes the hypothesis more coherent, not less. And it opens a new phase of investigation because the harbor itself is now a documented archaeological site that needs to be fully surveyed. And because the relationship between the harbor, the temple, the tunnel network, and any potential burial structure may become clearer as that survey proceeds. The tunnels beneath Taposiris Magna's main temple have not been fully excavated. Martínez's team has mapped their extent, but has not determined where all of them lead. The seafloor of the newly documented harbor area has not been fully surveyed at the resolution that would be needed to identify specific architectural elements. The zone between the temple complex and the shoreline, including areas that may lie under the modern road that runs along the coast, has not been scanned with ground-penetrating radar at the scale necessary to build a complete picture. There are significant sections of this site, in other words, that remain unexplored. The 2025 Harbor Survey opened a door. It did not walk through it. The most important chapter of this search may not have been written yet. 2,000 years after Cleopatra died in Alexandria, this is the honest accounting of where the search stands. Cleopatra VII Philopater died in Alexandria on August 12, 30 BC. That much the ancient sources agree on. The date, the location, the fact of her death, even when they disagree on the cause and the circumstances. She was 39 years old. She was the last ruler of independent Egypt. After her death, Egypt became a Roman province and remained one for 7 centuries. The ancient sources, primarily Plutarch, writing roughly a century and a half after the events, state that Octavian granted Cleopatra burial alongside Mark Antony. There is no strong ancient evidence to contradict this account. A shared tomb, somewhere in the vicinity of Alexandria, is the most defensible hypothesis based on what the ancient sources say. That tomb has never been found. Not in Alexandria's ancient royal quarter, not at any excavated site anywhere in Egypt. Taposiris Magna has produced, over 20 years of excavation by Kathleen Martínez's team, the strongest concentration of Cleopatra-associated archaeological material of any site outside central Alexandria. Coins, royal-scale foundation deposits, noble burials in the surrounding necropolis, and a tunnel network beneath the main temple that has not been fully explored. In 2025, the collaborative survey directed by Robert Ballard and Kathleen Martínez documented a real, substantial ancient harbor on the seafloor adjacent to Taposiris Magna. The survey confirmed the presence of shaped stone columns, ancient anchors, amphora fragments, and sections of polished worked stone floor in an area that has been submerged for centuries. National Geographic listed this discovery among the 6 most significant archaeological findings of 2025. We do not know exactly how Cleopatra died. The Asp story is old, detailed, and possibly invented. Possibly what Octavian needed people to believe in order to close the chapter on Egypt's last queen and move on. The forensic and historical evidence is genuinely ambiguous. We do not know where her body is. The tomb has not been found. We do not know whether the tomb still physically exists. 2,000 years of earthquakes, rising sea levels, coastal erosion, and construction have altered the ancient landscape of Alexandria and its surroundings in ways that may have destroyed the structure entirely, or rendered it unrecognizable, or buried it under modern infrastructure that cannot be excavated without disrupting a living city. We do not know whether the harbor documented in 2025 is associated with a royal complex that includes burial structures. The harbor is real. The connection between a harbor and a royal tomb is a hypothesis, not a confirmed fact. Moving from one to the other requires excavation, not inference. We do not know what is at the end of the tunnels beneath Taposiris Magna's main temple. There are physical spaces in the ground at this site that have not been entered or mapped. They may contain nothing relevant. They may contain something important. At the moment, they are simply unknown. Here is the deeper strangeness of this absence. Cleopatra VII was one of the most thoroughly documented rulers of the ancient world. Plutarch wrote about her at length. Appian wrote about her. Dio Cassius wrote about her in considerable detail. Julius Caesar's own writings touch on his time in Egypt. Mark Antony's biography intersected with hers for the last decade of both their lives. Shakespeare staged her 400 years after her death. She has been the subject of more paintings, more sculptures, more literary treatments than nearly any other figure from the classical world. Her name and face are globally recognizable. The historical record of what she did, how she thought, what she wanted, is richer than the record for most rulers of her era. And yet the physical record of her existence, her body, her burial site, her tomb, is simply not there. That absence is unlikely to be accidental. Octavian had political reasons to want her physical legacy to fade. A Cleopatra who died cleanly, mythologically, in a sealed room with a serpent, that was a narrative he could manage, a story that ended. A Cleopatra buried in an accessible tomb that attracted pilgrimages, whose memory was sustained by a physical monument, that was a problem. The last ruler of independent Egypt, represented at a burial site that Egyptians could visit and organize around, Octavian had every reason to ensure that location remained obscure. The deliberate fading of her physical legacy may have begun within hours of her death, or the tomb is somewhere that has simply not been excavated yet, or it was destroyed by the earthquake of 365 AD, which reshaped the coastline of Alexandria and caused a tsunami that devastated settlements across the eastern Mediterranean. Or it is under a road, under a building, under the sea, somewhere that no researcher has yet had the opportunity to look properly. We don't know. That is the honest answer. And it is an honest answer that 2,000 years of inquiry have not been able to improve on. Some discoveries take much longer than expected. The wreck of the Titanic sat on the bottom of the North Atlantic for 73 years before Ballard's sonar found it. Not because no one looked, but because the ocean is vast and the right methodology took time to develop. The tomb of Cleopatra has been sought actively for a century. The right combination of location, technology, and resources may not yet have converged. The question is not whether Cleopatra's tomb exists somewhere in the archaeological record. The question is whether we will recognize it when we finally see it, and whether the evidence accumulating at Taposiris Magna right now is the first signal from that answer. In the next video, we go further into what Kathleen Martínez's team found in those tunnels, and why one particular object recovered from beneath Taposiris Magna may be the closest thing to a direct fingerprint that the ancient world has left us. Some truths refuse to stay buried.